They dumped me in a shelter with note, "You deserve it." Then I shocked them with new property they couldn't afford to enter. The snow outside our house fell in thick, heavy sheets, the kind that muffles everything except cruelty. Rachel stood in the middle of the living room, her arms crossed over that red sweater she loved so much, her lips pressed into a line sharp enough to cut glass. "You think you own this house just because you gave birth to him?" she said, her voice slicing through the air. "You're just a guest who stayed too long." Her words hung there, louder than the wind outside. I tried to keep my voice steady. This was my home too. Rachel smiled, not the kind of smile people give when they're amused, but the kind they give before they shut a door. "Was," she said. Past tense. Mark was by the window, his head bowed as if he could hide from what was happening. I waited for him to speak, to tell her to stop, to remember who I was. Instead, he picked up my suitcase from the corner and threw it onto the floor. The latch snapped open, and my things spilled across the hardwood sweaters, my reading glasses, the family photo from Yellowstone that cracked when it hit the ground. "Mom," he said, his voice low, almost rehearsed. "It's for your own good. The shelter will take care of you." I looked at him, searching for a trace of the boy who once held my hand crossing the street. All I saw was a man who couldn't meet my eyes. "You're sending me away," I whispered. Rachel snorted. "We're saving ourselves," she said. "You should be grateful." He reached for my arm, gently at first, then tighter when I didn't move. "Come on, Mom, let's go." My knees gave way when he pulled me toward the door, my slippers slipping on the polished floor. The cold hit me first when the door opened. Colorado winter, merciless and dry. Rachel followed, holding a folded sheet of paper. She shoved it into my open suitcase. "Here," she said, her tone almost cheerful. "Something to read on cold nights. It says what you deserve." The paper fluttered once before falling among my things. I saw the words in black marker, thick and final. "You deserve it." He didn't let me look back. My son, the same child I had carried through pneumonia, who once fell asleep on my shoulder during thunderstorms, kept his eyes on the driveway as he led me to the car. The tires crunched against the frozen ground, and not one of us spoke. If you feel justice deserves celebration, smash that hype button. Let us keep stories like this alive, echoing far, far away. Your support helps us bring understanding and love to those who deserve it. Thank you so much. Keep listening. I watched the house grow smaller in the side mirror, the porch light flickering in the distance. My reflection looked older than I remembered, the corners of my mouth trembling. Inside that car, everything I had built was reduced to silence and exhaust smoke. Mark's hands gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. "Mom, please don't make this harder," he said quietly. "You'll be safe there." I turned to him. "Safer than being loved?" He didn't answer. He just kept driving. The shelter sat on the edge of town, behind a faded church and a parking lot full of cracked ice. The sign read, "Street Mary's Haven, for those in need." The Y in Mary's was missing, and the wind made the sign groan. Mark parked, got out, opened my door. He didn't touch me this time. "You'll be fine," he said. His breath formed clouds in the cold air. "They'll take care of you better than I can." I wanted to ask him why. Why he couldn't look at me. Why he let her speak to me that way. Why love had an expiration date. But the words stuck in my throat, too heavy to push out. He lifted my suitcase from the trunk and dropped it near the steps. The latch popped open again, scattering my clothes into the snow. The piece of paper slid free and landed face up on the ice. "You deserve it." Mark hesitated, then turned back toward the car. "Goodbye, Mom," he said, like someone ending a phone call, not a life together. The engine started before I even reached for my bag. I stood there, the snow blowing into my hair, melting down my neck. The shelter's door creaked open, and a woman's voice called from inside, "Come in, sweetheart, it's freezing." I looked at her but couldn't move yet. The paper clung to the ice by my foot, the ink bleeding slightly in the cold. I bent down, picked it up, and stared at it for a long time. The words didn't hurt the way I thought they would. They just felt empty, like an echo that had forgotten what it meant. The woman waited, holding the door open. "You coming?" she asked again. I nodded finally, my legs stiff from the cold. I carried my torn suitcase and the note that had already begun to curl at the edges. The door closed behind me, and the sound was soft, nothing like the slam I had expected. Inside smelled like disinfectant and weak coffee. The woman pointed to a cot by the wall. "You can rest there tonight," she said kindly. I set my suitcase down, sat, and looked at my hands. They were shaking, not from the cold, but from everything that had been taken. For a long while, I couldn't think, couldn't cry. There was just a strange kind of quiet, thick, unreal. Through the cracked window, I could see the streetlight flickering. The paper was still in my lap, damp now but legible. I pressed it flat against the thin blanket and whispered to myself, maybe I do deserve it. Just not like this. Then I lay down, staring at the ceiling, and listened to the sound of other people breathing in their sleep, wondering which of us had fallen the farthest. The shelter smelled like bleach, old blankets, and exhaustion. The air was thick with whispers, snores, and the occasional cough that no one bothered to cover. Every bed was taken rows of cots lined up like forgotten soldiers, each with a story that no one cared to hear. I was shown to a top bunk by a volunteer who didn't look older than my grandson would have been. She didn't ask my name, just pointed and walked away. "That one's open." I climbed up carefully, clutching the railing as if the ground beneath me might give way too. No one there knew I used to be a head nurse. No one cared. To them, I was just another lost old woman waiting for morning. That first night, I barely slept. The metal frame groaned every time someone turned over. Somewhere in the dark, a man cried out a name. Someone else muttered a prayer that ended in a cough. The sound of the radiator clicking reminded me of the heart monitor in the hospital. Steady, indifferent. I stared at the ceiling and thought about the home I had built, the laughter that once filled it, the dinners, the holidays, and how silence had replaced it all. At dawn, a bell rang. People shuffled toward the cafeteria, clutching plastic trays. I followed the smell of burnt toast and watery coffee. That was when I met Katrina. She was tall, solid, with skin like polished mahogany and a voice that carried a kind of tired strength. She wore a faded green sweater and moved like she owned the room. "First night's the hardest," she said when she saw me staring at my food. "After that, you stop crying because no one listens anyway." I looked up at her, startled by her bluntness. "I'm not staying," I said quietly, my fork barely touching the scrambled eggs. Katrina laughed, a dry, warm sound. "That's what we all said." She sat across from me without asking. "You from around here?" "Colorado Springs," I said. She nodded. "Figures. You talk like you've still got a house somewhere." I didn't answer. The coffee was bitter, but I kept drinking it. It gave me something to do with my hands. She noticed. "You had a life," she said softly. "You still do. It's just smaller now." I wanted to be angry at her for being right. But there was something about her tone, matter of fact, not pitying, that made me stay quiet instead. The days began to blur after that. Morning chores, laundry, kitchen duty. I volunteered to help in the infirmary corner, patching small cuts and checking blood pressure. It was muscle memory. I didn't need to think. The younger volunteers started asking me questions: how to handle a fainting case, what dose to use for mild dehydration. For a moment, I felt almost useful again. Then came the day that changed everything. It was Thursday, cold enough that the air outside cut through the walls. The shelter was hosting a food drive sponsored by a local businessman named Henry Lawson. I'd seen his name on billboards before real estate, charity galas, a man who smiled from every newspaper. He arrived with his team, shaking hands, giving speeches, all polished charm. People lined up for meals, the atmosphere oddly festive. Then someone screamed. A few tables away, Henry Lawson collapsed mid-sentence, his face draining of color, his coffee cup shattered on the floor. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then, chaos broke loose, people shouting, backing away, dropping trays. I froze. For a second, I was back in the hospital, that smell of panic familiar as blood. My hands knew before my mind did. I pushed through the crowd, dropped to my knees beside him, checked for a pulse. Weak, thready. His lips were already turning blue. "Call 911!" I shouted, though my voice was swallowed by the noise. I tilted his head back, cleared his airway, started compressions. 1, 2, 3, my arms burned, my breath quickened, but I didn't stop. Someone cried, "He's too old." But I ignored them. His ribs were fragile under my palms, but life still flickered there, faint and stubborn. When I leaned down to give rescue breaths, the metallic taste of fear filled my mouth. "Come on," I whispered between compressions. "Don't you dare go quiet on me." Minutes stretched. Then, a sound the faintest gasp. His chest rose. The sirens wailed in the distance. Relief hit me so hard I nearly fell backward. When the paramedics took over, I sat there on the cold floor, my knees shaking, my heart pounding against my ribs. As they lifted him onto the stretcher, Henry Lawson opened his eyes for just a moment. His gaze met mine. He tried to speak. I leaned closer, thinking he needed help. Instead, he said, in a hoarse whisper, "People forget kindness. Kindness never forgets people." Then he closed his eyes, and they carried him away. The crowd began to disperse. Conversations returned, cautious and awed. Someone patted my shoulder. A volunteer handed me a blanket. I didn't feel the cold. I only felt the tremor in my hands, the same hands that had been told they were no longer good for anything. Katrina found me sitting by the wall later, still clutching the blanket. She set down a cup of coffee in front of me. "Guess the world ain't done with you yet," she said. I looked at her, unsure whether to laugh or cry. The cup was warm, and for the first time since I'd arrived, it didn't taste like pity. It tasted like something else, something that felt dangerously close to hope. It had been a month since the day Henry Lawson collapsed, and the shelter had already folded the story into its long list of tragedies that came and went like weather. People forgot. That was the rhythm here. But one morning, when the sky was the color of ash and the coffee tasted weaker than usual, a man in a dark suit appeared at the entrance. He looked so out of place among the peeling walls and the smell of disinfectant that everyone stopped talking. His shoes were polished, his coat too fine for a place that reeked of broken luck. He asked for me by name. "Mrs. Judy Williams?" For a second, I thought he had the wrong person. No one used my full name anymore. Here, I was just Judy Bed 12. "Yes," I said cautiously. He nodded once, then opened his briefcase. "I'm Daniel Reed. I'm a representative from the Lawson estate." The room fell into a low hum. Even Katrina, usually unbothered by everything, leaned in from the kitchen doorway, her brow raised. "I'm sorry to bother you here," he continued, "but Mr. Lawson left something for you. He passed away last week." The words hit me like a sudden drop in air pressure. I didn't know him, not really just the brief, intense moment of saving his life. He didn't make it?" "He did," Daniel said softly. "For a while, long enough to finish what he wanted to do." He reached into his case and pulled out an envelope sealed with heavy wax. "This is for you." He dictated it before his passing. My fingers trembled as I took it. The paper felt expensive, out of place against my calloused hands. I broke the seal and unfolded the letter. The handwriting was weak but steady. "To the woman who didn't look away, you reminded me that worth isn't wealth. You deserve a home. Henry Lawson." I blinked, thinking maybe I'd misread. "There must be a mistake," I said, handing it back. "I just did what anyone would." Daniel smiled, calm and knowing. "That's why he chose you." He took out a second folder and laid it on the cafeteria table. Inside were legal papers, official stamps, and a property deed. "He has transferred ownership of one of his model homes in Silver Pines Resort to you. It's fully paid. And," he paused, as if unsure how much to say, "you're also listed as beneficiary to 5% of his holding company's shares." The shelter went silent. A spoon clattered to the floor. Katrina whistled low. 5%? Lord have mercy, that's not pocket change. I stared at the papers as though they might vanish if I blinked. "This doesn't make sense," I murmured. "I don't even own a proper winter coat." Daniel's tone softened. "He said you'd say that." He slid a small envelope toward me. Inside is the address. The property manager will meet you tomorrow if you'd like to see it. There's no obligation. But it's yours, Mrs. Williams. Katrina laughed, shaking her head. Looks like karma finally found your address. I didn't laugh. I just sat there, staring at the words, "You deserve a home." They looked so much like the other note, the cruel one Rachel had written, that my stomach turned. How strange that the same words could carry such opposite meanings depending on who said them. The next morning, I packed what little I had: 2 sweaters, my old ID, and that damned note that had followed me from the snow. The shelter staff hugged me like they didn't quite believe I was leaving. "We'll save your bed," one of them said, half joking. Katrina stood by the door, arms crossed. "Don't go turning fancy on us now," she said. "Not a chance," I replied, though even as I said it, I wasn't sure I believed myself. The drive to Silver Pines felt unreal. The road wound through forests frosted with ice, and the higher we climbed, the thinner the air grew. The driver stopped before a cabin perched on a ridge overlooking a frozen lake. The place was simple but beautiful, wood-paneled, large windows, a porch that faced the sunrise. Smoke still lingered from a distant chimney, but the air was silent except for the wind brushing the pine trees. Inside, everything was untouched. No furniture, no footprints, just a faint scent of cedar. It felt like a pause between 2 lives. I set my bag down and stood in the middle of the empty living room. Light poured in through the window, painting the dust in gold. For a long time, I didn't move. Then I took the folded piece of paper from my bag, the one Rachel had thrown at me that night. The edges were torn now, the ink slightly smudged, but the words were still clear. "You deserve it." I found a nail and hammered it into the wall, right across from the bed. I hung the paper there, where I'd see it every morning and every night. "Fine," I said aloud to the empty room. My voice echoed softly against the wood. "Let's see what I really deserve." The wind howled through the trees outside, as if answering me. I sat on the bare floor, the paper swaying gently in the draft, and for the first time since the snow, I didn't feel small. I felt seen. The house didn't feel like charity. It felt like a mirror, showing me who I used to be before love became a debt. When the sun set, the room turned to amber. I lay down on the cold floor, wrapped my coat tighter, and stared at the note on the wall. The words no longer hurt, they were mine now. The first time I saw my own name in print again, it was on the front page of the local newspaper, folded neatly beside the doorstep of my new cabin. "Elderly homeless woman inherits property from late philanthropist." The headline sat above a grainy photo of me at the shelter, wearing the same coat I'd been thrown out in, standing behind a table of soup cans. I stared at it for a long time, tracing the words with my fingertip. Elderly homeless woman. I had been called worse, but seeing it in black and white still felt like a bruise. I didn't tell anyone. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that doesn't comfort you yet, only tests you. But a storm was already building somewhere far away, and it began like most storms do these days on social media. Rachel saw it first. Of course she did. She spent her mornings scrolling through her phone like it was oxygen, sipping the kind of coffee that came with a loyalty card. When she saw my picture, she almost dropped her mug. "You've got to be kidding me," she hissed. "That woman conned a dying man. She's a parasite." Mark looked up from his laptop. "Who?" She turned the screen toward him, stabbing her manicured finger against my face. "Your mother. Look. Local nurse saves businessman, inherits property. She's everywhere." He blinked, his jaw tightening. "That's impossible." Rachel's tone sharpened. "Oh, it's possible. She's been playing victim for years. You remember the shelter? What if she planned all this?" Mark didn't answer. He stared at the image for a long time, something unspoken flickering across his face. Shame, maybe, or regret. But Rachel didn't notice. She was already pacing. "We're drowning in debt, Mark. The bank's been calling every week, and she's sitting in some mountain cabin with our money." "Our money?" he said quietly. "She owes us," Rachel snapped. "After everything we did for her, after everything she put us through." Mark rubbed his forehead. "Rachel, we threw her out." Rachel froze mid-step, then turned, her voice turning cold. "She chose to leave. Don't rewrite it." She sat down across from him, her tone suddenly soft, sugary. Look, if we play this right, if we show up, apologize, offer to, we're connect, she'll let us back in. She's sentimental, always was. We'll visit, act nice, and then, well, she won't be around forever. Mark looked at her like he didn't quite recognize her. But he didn't argue. Maybe guilt makes people quiet, or maybe cowardice just looks like agreement. 2 days later, a black SUV wound its way through the snowy road to Silver Pines. I was sitting by the window, reading the paper again, when I heard the low growl of the engine. The sound made something in me tighten. Only one person I knew drove that make of car, and it wasn't a stranger. I didn't move at first. The vehicle parked neatly outside the fence, tires crunching over the snow. Through the frosted glass, I could make out 2 figures, Rachel in her beige coat, Mark in his old winter jacket. She was holding a basket wrapped in cellophane, probably filled with whatever she thought looked like forgiveness. I let out a slow breath. Even ghosts find their way back, I whispered. They stood outside for a few seconds, rehearsing their smiles, I could tell. Rachel adjusted her hair in the car's reflection, then took Mark's arm and led the way up the steps. Her heels clicked too loudly for a mountain cabin. When the knock came, it was gentle, too gentle. I opened the door before they could knock again. Rachel's face lit up with the kind of brightness that burns fake. "Judy," she said, her voice honeyed. "You look, well." She held out the basket. "We brought something for you. Fresh flowers. We just wanted to see you." Mark stood behind her, silent, eyes darting between us. For a long moment, I didn't speak. The cold air rolled between us, the smell of pine and distance filling the space where love used to live. Then I stepped aside, just enough for them to see the inside of the house, but not enough for them to enter. Rachel's smile wavered when she saw me standing there, calm, steady, unbroken. I met her gaze, my voice low but clear. "You found me," I said. She laughed nervously. "Of course, we were so worried." I tilted my head, the faintest smile on my lips. "Worried?" I said. "You left me with a note that said I deserved it. I suppose you were right. I just didn't know it would look like this." The wind caught the door then, pushing it slightly open. Behind me, on the wall above the fireplace, hung the same piece of paper she had written that night, "You deserve it," framed neatly like a relic. Rachel's eyes flicked to it, and for the first time, her smile faltered completely. "Come in?" She tried, her voice small now. I didn't move. My hand rested lightly on the doorknob, and I could see Mark swallow hard, shame pooling behind his silence. I looked between them, my son, and the woman who had taught him how to forget. "You should have called first," I said finally. Then, very gently, I closed the door. Not a slam, just a click. The same sound he'd made the night he shut me out. The next time they came, I opened the door before they could knock. The snow had stopped, but the air outside still bit at the skin. Rachel was wearing a designer coat, the kind that screamed effort, while Mark stood behind her, hands buried deep in his pockets. I could tell they had practiced whatever was coming. "Come in," I said. My voice was even, calm, too calm maybe. The dining table was already set, 2 bowls of soup, fresh bread, and a pot of stew still steaming faintly. It wasn't much, but it was warm, and that seemed to unsettle Rachel more than if I'd served her nothing. She sat down first, crossing her legs carefully, while Mark hovered behind her, like a boy who didn't know whether to obey or flee. Rachel smiled, wide and brittle. "We've missed you so much, Judy. The house isn't the same without you." I didn't answer right away. I poured soup into her bowl, then into Mark's, the spoon clinking softly against the rim. "Eat while it's hot," I said. Mark cleared his throat. "You really fixed this place up. It's nice." Rachel gave him a look that said, "Don't ruin the script." She turned back to me, eyes glistening with rehearsed tenderness. "You must have been so lonely here all by yourself. We should have done more." Still, I said nothing. I reached into the drawer beside me and pulled out a small frame, setting it gently on the table between us. Inside, behind the glass, was that single piece of paper, the one she had thrown at me in the snow. You deserve it. Rachel froze. The smile slipped from her face for the first time. I brought this from the shelter, I said, my voice steady. It helped me remember who you are. Mark's eyes dropped to the table. His spoon stopped moving. Rachel forced a laugh, a brittle sound that cracked halfway through. Oh, that, she said, waving her hand. It was a stupid joke. You took it too seriously. Stupid? I asked quietly. It was the truest thing you ever said to me. The silence that followed was heavy enough to make the air hum. Rachel straightened in her seat, trying to recover the upper hand. You've done well for yourself, she said with mock sweetness. That man, what was his name? Lawson? He must have really liked you. I looked her in the eye. He liked honesty. That's why he left it to me. That landed like a slap. Rachel's jaw tightened. You think this little house makes you better than us? I smiled slightly. No, it just makes me free. You can't afford that anymore. Her face hardened. Don't talk to me like that. After everything we did for you. I cut her off gently. You mean after everything you took? Mark flinched. Rachel shot him a glare. Mark, say something. He looked at me, then at her, and for a moment I thought he might. But instead, he sighed, rubbing his temples. Rachel, let's go. She slammed her napkin down, her voice sharp. You're pathetic. No, I said softly, standing. He's just late. He'll learn. Rachel stood too, knocking over her chair. You ungrateful. Careful, I said. That word fits you better than me. The air between us was ice now, colder than the wind outside. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Her anger filled the whole room. Mark grabbed her arm. Let's go, he repeated. Rachel yanked free, glaring at me one last time. You'll regret this. You always do. I walked them to the door, not out of politeness, but because I wanted to watch them leave. The sound of their boots on the porch echoed like an ending I'd waited too long for. As the car engine started, I leaned against the doorway, the heat from the house warming my back, the cold biting my face. You can leave again, I said softly, though they couldn't hear me over the wind. This time, I won't follow. When the sound of their tires faded down the mountain road, I closed the door. Not gently this time, not cruelly either, just enough to seal the quiet in. The soup on the table had gone cold, untouched. I sat back down, took a bite anyway. It was bland, but it was mine. It began the way lies always do, loud, fast, and easy to believe. One morning, I walked into the cafe and saw Katrina standing frozen by the counter, her phone in her hand, her face tight. She didn't look up when I greeted her. She just turned the screen toward me. There it was, my face plastered across a viral post, a headline in screaming letters. Old woman scams dying millionaire locals demand investigation. Beneath it was a photo of me from the newspaper, next to a smirking shot of Rachel, hair perfect, voice full of poison even in print. I read the caption once, twice, and still couldn't believe how easily she twisted kindness into crime. The post quoted Rachel directly. My husband's mother manipulated a sick, confused man into signing over property. She's been exploiting his death for sympathy and money. It's disgusting. By noon, the comments had already split the internet in two. Some called me a thief, others defended me. But no one knew the truth, and the truth, in those first few hours, didn't matter. Katrina slammed her phone down. That woman's playing with fire. I sighed. She's always liked the sound of crackling. Still, the noise grew. Reporters called. Tabloids speculated. Even an old colleague from the hospital sent me a message that began with, I don't know what to believe. For the first time in months, I felt that old ache again, the one that comes when your name doesn't feel like yours anymore. I'd rebuilt my life from ash, and here she was, tossing matches back into it. 3 days later, the storm changed direction. A press conference appeared on every local channel. The backdrop showed the familiar crest of Lawson Enterprises. Behind the podium stood a young man. I recognized the late Henry Lawson's lawyer. His name was Andrew Keller, a sharp-eyed kid who had looked about 12 the day he handed me Henry's letter. Now, his voice was steady, deliberate. "This morning," he said, "false claims circulated regarding Mr. Lawson's final will and the woman he chose to honor with part of his estate. Out of respect for transparency, we are releasing a private video message recorded by Mr. Lawson himself 3 days before his passing." The reporters went silent. Cameras zoomed in. The screen behind Keller flickered, and then Henry appeared frail, pale, but unmistakably alive in spirit. He was sitting up in a hospital bed, his voice thin but firm. "If you're watching this," he said, "then my time is done. But before I go, I want to make one thing clear. To Judy Williams, the woman who didn't look away when I fell, who treated me like a man and not a headline, this gift is not charity. It's gratitude. You saved my life when no one else did. I hope this house reminds you that decency still means something." The video ended. The room stayed quiet for several seconds before the questions began, shouted, tangled, desperate. But the truth didn't need help anymore. It was already running wild. By evening, every major outlet had picked up the story. Video confirms philanthropist's gift genuine. Scam accusation exposed as lie. Katrina burst into the cafe kitchen, waving her phone like a victory flag. "You're trending again," she said, "but this time, they're calling you a hero." I laughed softly. "That's funny. They called me a burden last year." She grinned. "Guess people love a comeback." The door chimed as a small group of reporters entered, polite but insistent. One of them, a young woman with a camera crew behind her, approached me. "Mrs. Williams," she said, "do you have anything you'd like to say to your family?" I looked past her, through the window, where the mountains were turning gold with the afternoon light. I thought about Mark's silence, Rachel's rage, and the note that had followed me through snow and shelters. Then I looked into the camera. "They said I deserved a shelter," I said slowly. "Maybe they were right. It sheltered me from them." The reporter's mouth opened slightly, as if she didn't know what to say next. She didn't have to. The segment aired that night. By morning, Rachel's social media accounts were flooded with outrage. People dug up old photos, pieced together timelines, and by lunchtime, public opinion had shifted entirely. Greedy daughter-in-law exposed. Man disowns own mother, loses everything. Mark tried to stay quiet, but silence is its own confession. Their company's investors pulled out within a week. Contracts dissolved. Even Rachel's influencer sponsorships vanished overnight. The internet has a short memory for kindness, but a long one for hypocrisy. I didn't celebrate. There were no toasts or triumphant smiles. Justice, when it finally comes, doesn't roar, it exhales. That evening, I stood alone in the cafe, the air filled with the scent of roasted beans and cinnamon. The world outside was still buzzing with noise, but inside, everything was calm. I brewed a single cup of coffee and carried it to the window. The sky had begun to dim, streaked with purple and gold. For a moment, I saw my reflection in the glass, older, yes, but whole. Katrina poked her head in from the back room. "You okay, Judy?" I nodded. "I'm fine." The coffee steamed between my hands, warm and steady. "Turns out," I said softly, "the truth doesn't need revenge, it just needs time." She smiled. "And maybe a good cup of coffee." I raised the mug slightly. "That too." As the evening light spilled across the floor, I took a slow sip, letting the warmth settle through me. Somewhere out there, Rachel was learning the cost of cruelty, and Mark was remembering the sound of his own mother's voice. But here, in this quiet corner of Colorado, I had something better than justice. I had peace. And peace, unlike forgiveness, can't be taken back. It started with a thought I couldn't shake, a quiet sentence that followed me through every morning coffee and every long night staring at the cabin walls. What if the shelter wasn't the end, but the beginning? The money from Henry's shares had been sitting untouched in the bank for months, accumulating interest I didn't need. I kept telling myself I'd use it someday, but someday is a word people use to stay still. One morning, as the snow melted into spring, I took the letter he'd written me, the one that said, "You deserve a home," and placed it beside the cruel note Rachel had thrown into my suitcase. 2 sentences, same words, opposite worlds. I decided it was time to build something that would make the difference visible. By summer, Construction began on the edge of town, where an old brick warehouse had stood abandoned for years. The locals thought I was crazy. "You're turning that wreck into what, a cafe?" they asked. I just smiled and said, "Not exactly." When the doors finally opened, the sign above the entrance read, "The Shelter House." It wasn't just a cafe. It was a place for women like me, the forgotten, the dismissed, the ones who had been told their lives were over because someone younger decided they were inconvenient. Inside, we had warm coffee, second-hand books, and long tables where no one ate alone. I used the same kind of beds from the shelter, but here, they came with soft sheets and dignity. Katrina ran the place like a captain steering a ship through calm waters. She'd traded the soup ladle of the shelter kitchen for an apron that read, "Manager," and she wore it with pride. "You sure about the name?" She'd asked me the day the sign went up. "Yes," I said. "If that's where I was left to die, it's only fair I turn it into somewhere others can live." On the main wall hung a glass frame. Inside it was the original note Rachel had written, "You deserve." It still creased from the snow, but now preserved like a relic. Beneath it, a brass plate read, "They said I deserved nothing, so I built something from it." People stopped to read it every day. Some laughed, some cried, some just stared quietly as if trying to find themselves in those few words. A few months after the opening, the media came calling again. A local TV crew set up cameras in front of the counter, where Katrina stood steaming milk for lattes. The reporter was young, nervous, the kind who'd practiced smiling in mirrors. "Mrs. Williams," she said, holding the microphone, "what made you start the shelter house?" I looked around at the women laughing softly over coffee, at the old piano in the corner someone had donated, at the smell of cinnamon and warmth. "Because people like me shouldn't have to start from nothing twice," I said. The reporter nodded, scribbling notes. Then she hesitated before asking, "Do you forgive your family, Mrs. Williams?" That question landed like a pebble in water small, but the ripples went far. I thought about Rachel's cold smirk, about Mark's silence, about that night in the snow when I'd believed I was finished. Then I smiled, calm and steady. "Forgiveness," I said, "is a room I no longer live in." She blinked, unsure if that was sadness or peace. I knew it was both. The story aired that evening. They showed the frame on the wall, the women working behind the counter, the laughter that filled what used to be emptiness. Donations poured in, volunteers showed up, and suddenly the shelter house wasn't just mine. It belonged to everyone who had ever been told they were disposable. One evening, after closing, Katrina stayed behind to clean. The lights were low. The air smelled like coffee and soap. She wiped down the glass frame carefully, her reflection overlapping mine in it. "You turned pain into a place, Judy," she said quietly. "That's rare." I watched her for a moment, the golden light catching the soft lines on her face. "Maybe we all deserve that chance," I said. She smiled, setting the cloth down. "You really think so?" "I know so," I replied. Outside, the sign glowed faintly under the streetlight. The Shelter House. It looked like a promise kept. When I locked up that night, I touched the frame one last time, my fingers brushing over the cold glass. The words inside no longer hurt. They were proof that even cruelty, when faced head-on, could be rebuilt into kindness. And for the first time since that night in the snow, I didn't feel like a guest in my own life. I felt home. The first time I saw them again, I almost didn't recognize them. It was early autumn, the kind of morning when Colorado light falls soft over everything, even old wounds. The cafe was already alive with chatter, the smell of roasted beans, the clinking of cups, the quiet hum of laughter from women who'd learned how to start over. I was behind the counter, wiping a cup dry, when I saw a familiar car pull into the lot. It wasn't the same car they used to drive. It was older now, scuffed, tired, just like them. Rachel stepped out first. Her hair was still perfect, though a bit duller now, and her coat looked like it had been borrowed from someone with better luck. Mark followed, moving slower than I remembered, his shoulders sagging as if the weight of everything he'd ignored had finally settled on him. Katrina noticed them too. "You expecting guests?" she asked quietly. "No," I said. "Not anymore." They didn't see me through the window at first. They were too busy looking around, their eyes darting from the sign above the door, the shelter house, to the steady stream of customers walking in and out. Rachel turned to Mark. "I heard they're hiring. If we can just get in front of her, maybe she'll listen. She owes us that much." Mark didn't answer. He looked up at the building like it was something sacred he'd forgotten how to approach. When they reached the front door, the security guard, a kind old veteran named Luis, stepped forward. "Sorry," he said, his tone polite but firm. "Private property, members only." Rachel's jaw tightened. "We're not strangers," she snapped. "Tell Mrs. Williams her family is here." Luis gave a small, regretful smile. "Ma'am, she told us family doesn't visit here anymore." The words hit her like ice. For a moment, I saw the same rage that had burned in her eyes the day she threw me out into the snow. She took a step forward, trying to peer through the glass. "You can't keep us out," she shouted. "You can't do this to us." Inside, every sound seemed to quiet. The espresso machine hissed softly. Someone set a cup down too quickly. I turned, wiping my hands on my apron, and walked toward the window. Through the glass, our eyes met. Hers were wild, desperate, trembling with pride and panic. Mine were steady. For a second, the years between us disappeared, and we were back in that living room again, her standing over me, me begging for a trace of decency. I opened the door halfway, enough to let the air and the truth pass between us. "I didn't do this to you," I said gently. "You did." Rachel's lips parted, but no sound came out. Mark lowered his gaze, shame painting his face in a way that no loss of money ever had. Luis stepped closer, waiting for a signal. I gave him a small nod. He closed the door quietly. Through the glass, I watched them stand there for a few seconds more. Rachel pressed her palm against the door like she could force it open through sheer indignation. Mark reached out to her arm, murmured something, and finally, they turned and walked away. The snow from their shoes left melting trails on the pavement, fading fast, like everything else they thought they owned. Inside, the cafe exhaled. Conversations resumed, music floated back into the air. Katrina came over, sliding a cup toward me. "You handled that better than I would have," she said softly. I smiled faintly. "Anger's expensive. I can't afford it anymore." I went back behind the counter, where the framed note still hung. "You deserve it." The words that once tore through me had become my creed. Below it, the brass plaque gleamed. They said I deserved nothing, so I built something from it. As the afternoon sun shifted, the door opened again, not for ghosts of my past, but for someone new. An elderly woman stood there, wrapped in an old coat 2 sizes too big. Her hands trembled as she held out a crumpled piece of paper. Is this the place?" she asked quietly. Katrina greeted her first, but the woman's eyes were on me. She walked forward, unfolding the paper with care. I recognized the words before I even saw them. "You deserve it." The same handwriting, the same cruelty. My throat tightened, but I smiled. "I know that note," I said softly. "It brought me here too." The woman looked down, embarrassed. "I didn't know where else to go. They said I should be grateful for what I get." I shook my head. "You don't have to be grateful for surviving. You just have to keep going." She nodded slowly, tears shining at the corners of her eyes. "Your first cup's on the house," I said, leading her to a table near the window. "But the name, you'll have to keep that for yourself." She let out a small, shaky laugh. "Fair enough." Katrina brought her a cup of coffee, rich and dark. The woman wrapped both hands around it like it was a fire in the middle of winter. As I watched her take the first sip, something settled deep in me, quiet, certain, whole. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't waiting for apologies or revenge. I'd already built my answer, brick by brick, kindness by kindness. Outside, the wind stirred through the trees, carrying the faint sound of laughter from the nearby park. The world had moved on, and so had I. Behind me, the espresso machine hissed again, steady and warm, like a heartbeat. I turned back to the counter, poured another cup, and whispered to myself, "We're not here to prove we deserve it anymore. We're here because we already do." And for the first time in my life, that felt like enough. And that, my dear listener, is how the story of the shelter house began not with revenge, but with a woman who learned that dignity can grow even from the coldest snow. Some people build walls to keep others out. Judy built doors warm, open, and waiting for those who once had nowhere to knock. Her hands, once trembling in the shelter, now pour coffee for others finding their way back to life. If this story touched you, if it reminded you that strength doesn't always shout, sometimes it just keeps breathing, then don't let it end here. Subscribe to Grandma True Stories, where voices like Judy's still whisper through the cracks of life, teaching us what it really means to survive, to forgive, and to begin again. Because somewhere out there, another grandma has a story waiting to be heard, and maybe, just maybe, it's one you need to hear next.